Michele, lovely to meet you this afternoon. Real pleasure. And I know you're a strong advocate of vested, which I want to explore, but also you have quite obviously an expert in outsourcing. I've obviously worked in that field for a number of years. So I'd like to explore obviously how outsourcing is going to change as well in your mind. But let's start with vested first. Why are you a strong advocate of vested?
So thanks, Chris, for having me here today. As you've noted, I've done outsourcing for a very, very, very long time. And I've been aware of vested since the earliest days. As a matter of fact, I'm actually, one of our case studies is quoted in Kate's very first book. So part of what I did many years ago is developed a lot of performance-based outsourcing contracts and put them in place. And as Kate was doing her research with the University of Tennessee into what kind of contracts work, she actually used one of our very successful performance-based outsourcing contracts with Microsoft as an example for what was a great way to do contracting. So I've been very focused on outsourcing for years, and I've watched Vested grow. And what Kate has done, what the University of Tennessee has done with Vested, is they've taken the best of the various sourcing methodologies that have worked well and the various relationship management models that have worked well and codified it. She's turned it into a methodology that people who aren't even experts in the business, who haven't done hundreds of deals, can follow the methodology and can be very successful in establishing relationships with providers with whom they want to do business in a way that makes it successful for both parties. And Kate loves to say win-win. I would tell you that everybody going into any outsourcing deal believes that the relationship that they're going to put in place is win-win. And that's their intent when they first start out. It's not always the result, but it's definitely the intent. And I think what Vested provides is a mechanism to enable that to really truly happen over time, not just when you first sign the deal, not just in your honeymoon period during the first 6 to 9 months, but long term. And that's really the beauty of Vested, is it enables the relationship to continue to stay on track, to be collaborative, to be successful, and to truly be win-win long term.
Now, look, you point probably the most significant piece, isn't it? Is that although people start off, you're right, doing a win-win, often that changes during the process. So it needs that discipline, doesn't it, to keep it on track. Is that fair?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I do think most people starting out, I mean, there's definitely those instances in, certainly historically, when procurements were done, where people definitely had the dominant subordinate, where the boss, you know, you're the vendor. And at some point in time, even vendor became a dirty word, in the sense that people wanted to maintain that you do what I tell you to. And if you ever attempt to do an outsourcing relationship that way, it's not going to work. So there's no argument that those do happen, but they, in my mind, sophisticated outsourcing relationships haven't been structured that way in years. But what Vested allows is to go beyond performance-based and to really be successful in the long-term outcome-based shared success collaborative relationships.
Now, this has been building, it seems to be building a momentum and understanding now. Is that fair? It's been quite a long time coming, hasn't it?
Well, you know what, if you look at any new way of doing things, whether it's a new technology, and you think about how long it takes for something to come to pass, to hit that tipping point, to become very successful, Vested's actually climbed that ladder pretty quickly. Even if you think about Lean and Six Sigma, those took years and years and years before they became worldwide movements. And Vested, while it's taken a few years, it's certainly taken almost, I think, a decade now. Kate would know better than I. It's certainly not been slow. That she's got almost 80 deals at this point with various CDAs that have been put in place around the world. And it's really done well. I do think what we're starting to see now is a little bit more of that wave, a little more of that roll that's starting to happen a little bit more than just the occasional.
So is it an education, or are there natural barriers to Vested?
Yeah, both. So I think education is important. I think a lot of people will tell you that, oh, when they first hear about it, oh, we have that, we do that, we're effectively vested, or we're almost vested. Yet you find that often the contract itself, which is typically where the lawyers have a tendency to get involved, are not truly vested contracts. That you might be fortunate enough to have a semi-vested relationship with the individuals with whom you originally put the contract in place. But the minute there's a changeover in personnel, the ability to carry that through is not there, because they haven't necessarily used a truly vested contract structure. B, they haven't put in place the relationship mechanisms around it to manage it effectively. And C, they haven't done the training effectively, not just to educate the people who were involved in putting the deal in place, but to educate all the way through both sides of the organization on people who have to do business that way every day. And it's definitely something that needs to be reinforced on a continual basis, even once the contract is executed.
Again, you touched on something really interesting, because one of the critics I've found who have been doing these interviews is people say this is what we do anyway. So this is just common sense. It's how we behave. So why do we need to listen to vested? Why do we need to do this?
Right. And as I said, there are some people who do truly behave in a vested manner. It's not the norm. I think the suppliers would prefer people perform in a more vested manner consistently. Providers, as a general rule, want to be seen as strategic partners, and many of them are very good at behaving in a strategic partner manner. On the client side, people are used to being in a command and control environment with their suppliers more often than not. Many have come up through the ranks, particularly more senior people, where command and control was the way things were done. And, there are some people who are mature and confident enough in what they know that they recognize that the reason they're bringing a supplier on is because that supplier has an incremental expertise. And I'm not suggesting, so I happen to be a strategic advisor in the area of primarily corporate real estate, corporate procurement, third-party management, risk management. So most of the clients that I have were truly experts in this space. And I don't want to imply that they need the suppliers to get the job done, but if they've made that decision, if they've chosen to outsource, then they've done so for a reason. And that reason is typically because that supplier brings something more to the table than they internally could deliver, whether that's the ability for their staff to continue to move up and be successful, whether it's the ability to implement new technologies that they don't have the wherewithal to do internally. There's a lot of good reasons to outsource, but once you've made that reason to outsource, the decision to outsource, it's really critical that you recognize that the people you outsource with are truly the experts and can bring something to the table. That's why you're hiring them. So most people recognize that, but it's hard not to fall back into that command and control environment because you're used to managing staff, directing what they should be doing. And that's the hard part. As long as you direct what they should be doing and not how they're doing it, then you can be successful. So keeping that in mind and making sure that how you talk to people and how you measure success and what you're looking at, those are all the things that you just need to reinforce over and over and over again. There's so much churn within everybody's staff that if you don't continually reinforce what we're doing and why we're doing it and how we need to behave, it's typically the client who's going to end up derailing it.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because it is about behaviors first and foremost, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And it's really about leadership, isn't it?
It is very much so. Yeah. It's about being confident in your ability to effectively be a leader, because you go from being a manager to being a leader. So when you think about it, they are supplier relationship managers on the client side, right? Or vendor relationship managers, call them whatever you want. But your job is to manage that relationship. It's not to manage the business. It is the supplier's job to manage operations. It is the supplier's job to execute on the objectives that you've set out, whether, hopefully collectively set out, but it is that supplier's job to manage the day-to-day. It's also their job to manage and help you contribute strategically, but it's your job as a client to manage the relationship and the success of that relationship. And oftentimes, what many clients don't really think about is it's your job to manage your client base. So, you need to be managing your demand. You need to be making sure that your customers understand what you bought and what they should expect to receive. And you need to make sure strategically you're conveying your client's needs to your provider. So it's a very different job that you're now doing as a supplier relationship manager than you were doing as the manager of that performance of that I mean, you're still accountable, don't get me wrong. You're still accountable to make sure that that performance gets done well, but you're managing the relationship. You're not managing the execution. Does that make sense?
It does. No, absolutely. Now, you're obviously an expert in outsourcing and have seen the changes. How do you think outsourcing is changing as a profession?
Well, outsourcing has become far more sophisticated. The type of outsourcing that I've been involved in for years typically involves many, many services all over the globe. It's very complex. It's often somewhat subjective in how you measure success. It's not something, it's not widgets, it's not production, it's not, I can get X done for Y dollars and you can get it done for Z dollars. So that's even better. It's much more about change, and it's huge amounts of change. Just think about with the pandemic and how significantly impacted every single corporation in the world has been as a result of the change of how people work. Well, the relationships that I put in place are relationships that people have to manage that successfully for their organization. So high complexity, very, very rapid pace of change, not easy to contract, not easy to document. And when you think about that, whether that's IT services or real estate services or hospitality services, you could go on and go down the list, even a lot of manufacturing services where you're delivering a service of manufacturing, you're not delivering the actual widget at the end of the day. You need to be able to be flexible. So you need a really good framework, but it needs to be highly flexible. And that's very difficult to contract to using the older methods. So people for years have been looking for new and more effective ways to keep both parties engaged, to keep both parties moving forward, to make sure that you're achieving the objectives that you knew when you originally signed an agreement. And many of these agreements were signed for 5, 7, 10 years. That's a phenomenal amount of change that takes place in that time. And if you don't have a relationship structure and a contractual structure in place that enables you to do that effectively, your hands are tied, usually by year 2 or 3 at the latest.
And it occurs to me that consultancy is changing alongside that quite a lot.
Very much so. Yeah, definitely.
I mean, to a high level. I mean, probably more than most things. If I go back 10 years, probably how a consultant was operating 10 years ago to how they're operating today has changed almost in light years. Is that fair?
I would say so. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously technology has come far more into play. A lot of stuff has gone far more virtual than it used to do. I think expertise becomes really, really important. There are those who believe you can do outsourcing deals and it doesn't matter what you're outsourcing, that the experience of doing the outsourcing deal is what counts. There are those who believe that you need to be an expert in the field in which you're doing the outsourcing. I actually happen to be on that side of the fence because I think that there's so many nuances, and I've turned down many assignments from people who say, wow, you did such a good job for us on this over here. Could you come do this over there? And my answer is no, but I'd be happy to recommend somebody who can, right? So I think as it has become more complex, it's become more imperative that you truly, truly understand the business in which you're advising, in addition to understanding how to effectively do outsourcing.
And has the pandemic helped this process?
I'd say the pandemic has been a challenge. I just completed a very successful, what I would call a vested flip with a client who had been in a relationship with this supplier for 11 years. They were both very happy together. They wanted to take it to the next step. And we contracted to do the deal in the beginning of January last year. So not this year, last year. And we were supposed to start the sessions, the on-site sessions in March. And we ended up having to shift everything to electronic. And while I am very grateful for products like Zoom and Teams and all that kind of stuff, the technology challenges associated with doing something this intimate over the remotely was very difficult. Now, did it work? Yes. Did we get it done? Yes. Was it a success? Yes. Was it twice as difficult for the advisor? Way yes. And the other thing that you miss is any relationship that you put in place is in some form intimate, right? You need to know people. You need to have that relationship. Fortunately for these guys, it was a flip. So they all knew each other really well. They've been doing business together for 11 years. So they didn't need that. But it was really hard to do those quick step asides and say, when you say something, you might want to use a different word, or catch them in the hallway by the drinking fountain or getting a cup of coffee and say, so let's just talk for a minute about what really just happened in the room, right? You can't do those things remotely. So the coaching aspect was really much more difficult. Did it get done? It absolutely got done. But, it maybe not quite as healthily as I would have wanted it to.
Oh, look, it's fascinating how we've all adapted during this period, isn't it? It
Yes.
really is.
And I think every service provider has to adapt in the delivery, as does every corporation have to adapt and adapt in their own delivery. So we're all part of the same thing. And fortunately, I think everybody cut everybody some slack because of it. So in some ways, it made it a little bit easier.
And what are your hopes now for the future in terms of consultancy, outsourcing, and for Vested? So 3 different questions in one there.
Sure. Yeah. So I am really excited to be part of, let's call it a wave, let's call it a method, a movement, I guess. Kate loves to think of it as a movement. So I've been doing this for over 30 years. And what I really like about where the industry is going is, unlike politics, people seem to be growing in respect for each other. And there's much more of an acknowledgement that we need to do this together. We need to be very successful in this together. And I love watching the aha moments that people get when, especially lawyers, when you bring them on board and you go, okay, so this is how we're going to do this now, and this is what we're going to mean. And their initial reaction typically is, oh man, I need all this language in here. And it's like, no, not really, because that's only going to matter if we go down the tank. And if we go down the tank, you agree to go away, right? So, I mean, there's still going to be opportunities for people to screw things up and use penalties and all that kind of stuff. But I do truly see people recognizing more and more that being collaborative and understanding that your suppliers need to be profitable, they need to be successful, they need to achieve their objectives. And the more they can achieve theirs, the more you can achieve yours. And that's just a really cool thing for me to see. So I'm really enjoying that. For me personally, my focus really right now is more on working on various educational things, teaching, writing, and just moving things forward.
So what are you writing about? Because I know you've become an author recently, haven't you?
Well, I've been authoring articles for years and years, but one of the interesting things is Kate and I at this point are talking actually about potentially writing a book together. So I'm kind of excited about that.
Oh, that's great. Is that on Vested?
It is.
Oh. So you obviously, so I suppose one of the questions is, in terms of Vested, it's obviously done well in the US, it's done quite well in the Nordic countries. Yes. It's beginning to develop in Europe. Is it a cultural thing, or do you see this becoming widespread, crossing culture?
It's definitely cultural, and it's while it has occurred in the US, actually, it hasn't occurred anywhere near as quickly as it has in the Nordics, for example. For some reason, they've just been hugely successful in making that happen. And there's been a number of deals that have been done in Canada as well. The US actually is kind of slow on picking it up. It has some, but not as fast as the Nordics. So I do think it's cultural. And I do think that, the US in particular has a tendency to be much more business hardcore, and getting people to open the kimono and really be honest with each other. And I mean, I'll be honest, I think there are a number of suppliers out there who really don't want to share their profit models. They're not too excited about that. And it's like, yeah, we want you to tell us everything, but we don't necessarily want to tell you everything, right? So I do think it needs to percolate some more. I think there's a lot of education. I think the various vested groups and, University of Tennessee and Kate and her team do a phenomenal job. It's been hard this last year because so many conferences have been canceled. They've gone virtual. I don't see the level of interest and participation that I saw 2 years ago. I'm hoping that'll come back, as people start getting in person more, because it's really exciting to connect with people and get them excited about stuff. And that's hard to do remotely.
Look, that's why I was wondering about the pandemic, because actually I've noticed the pandemic has created a better air of collaboration where we are in this together feeling, and we do want to work our way through this. However, what I've also noticed is as in the UK, we've been come out, all the bad behaviors are beginning to sneak back in again. So it will be interesting. You've almost got these two things running parallel. One, the bad behaviors over here still desperate to get back in, but people wanting to see real change. I think it'll be interesting how that plays out.
You know, one of the things in the area of real estate facilities management, there was a huge amount of pressure on the industry with COVID, right? Because these are the teams that are responsible for ensuring that you have a safe workplace. These are the teams that went in and put up all of the barriers and moved all the furniture, put all the signage, got all the, you know, all the cleanliness stuff was all their job. And every one of the suppliers did that, whether they were in a vested relationship or not in a vested relationship. But I think that what people have seen is the value of partnership. And there had to be an understanding that this was something that no one expected. Few were prepared for. Some had pandemic plans. Many were not executed effectively. Many didn't cover what the magnitude of what needed to happen. I think the world in general, the businesses in general, did a really, really phenomenal job very quickly of coming up to speed. And I'm hoping that, you know, the clients who were supported by those suppliers saw the value of that and saw the value of being partners and acknowledging that we are in this together and it's not your fault. And, you know, trying to hit suppliers with penalties at this point in time didn't succeed at all. You know, it was definitely a case of, oh, I need you to help me. I need to help you. What do you need? What do I need? Let's get through this together. And we'll figure it all out tomorrow as it relates to who's going to pay for this, because the reality is we're all going to pay for this in one form or fashion. So let's do it in a way that's equitable. And that's the best thing about vested is it's not about who owes who what, it's what's fair and what's equitable and what's right. So that as you're going through and change happens, you're structured in a way that enables you to look each other in the eye and say, this isn't my fault. Well, okay, it's not my fault either. Okay, so from there, let's figure it out. You know, who's the best person, who's the best positioned to manage this particular function right now, and whose responsibility is it to pay for it? And those are probably the two biggest questions that got asked every single day for the last, you know, 18 months. So if something can make that easy, then that's a good thing.
Oh, that's fascinating. Look, Michele, it's been a pleasure talking to you this afternoon. Thank you so much indeed for your time. I look forward to reading your book.
Great. Thank you. It was a pleasure. All right. Take care. Bye.